Welcome to week 2 of the Wellbeing series. My name's Leonie Hurrell and I am the founder and lead coach at the Thinking Academy. We provide coaching solutions to school, both through training and coaching practice, and also supporting head teachers and senior leaders with one-to-one executive coaching. We're running this series of vlogs really to support people's emotional well-being and ensure people stay mentally healthy throughout this current crisis. So we're running a 6-week program. Last week, we looked at the Kubler-Ross change curve, which is really pertinent in the current pandemic. This week, we're going to look at the neuroscience of thinking and feeling, and then we're going to follow that up on week 3 with developing our own emotional literacy and how we can become more emotionally agile. And then finally, we're going to move into the following week and look at some really basic ways of ensuring we keep positive and happy. So we're going to look at the 5 ways to well-being, which will support our mental and physical health. And then we're going to move into week 5 and look at specifically how we can manage overwhelm when things get too much, some tools and techniques. And then we're going to look at some self-compassion. These are 6 weeks that are planned out, but if there is anything else that you feel we can support with, we're more than happy to add to the programme. So let's start with today. So week 2. What we're going to be looking at is the science of the brain, really, and understanding how our thinking functions and how that affects our feeling and the impact on our well-being. And I'm going to use a few tools and techniques and also a few examples from work environments. I've worked now in over 200 schools, so I've got lots of practical and common themes and experiences that I can draw upon. So without further ado, let's have a look at the brain. So we're going to unpick the brain. Now, the brain, as we well know, is a very complex organ, and I'm really going to look at only 3 parts of the brain that are pertinent to sort of thinking and our emotions. So first of all, we've got the very primitive part of the brain, which is the limbic system. This is the oldest part of the brain, and it was there in our oldest ancestors, and it hasn't really changed much in terms of its functioning. And then we've got the prefrontal cortex, which is often known as the executive functioning part of the brain, which is here at the front part of the skull. And that's really a logical thinking and dealing with facts and information. And then the third part I'll mention is the storage system for all the information, which is a parietal lobe, which can be found all over the brain, and that really stores information and memories and also holds our beliefs and value systems. So it's quite a complex system to talk about. So really I want to use a very simple model that was developed by Professor Steve Peters, because it's a beautiful model and it helps me really explain what happens and how we can act upon things. It's called the chimp model. His book that he wrote was called The Chimp Paradox, The Tools for Mind Management. And Professor Steve Peters worked with the 2012 British Olympic team, specifically the cycling team, and helped them with their success by helping them manage their emotional thinking. So he refers to those 3 parts of the brain as the chimp part of the brain, which, as you can imagine, is the primitive part of our brain, the oldest part of the brain. It's really there for our survival, and it's why we are here as a species now, because it clearly works. In terms of, it's there really to look for threats and react to those threats. It's a very strong, powerful part of the brain because it needs to take over in terms of when we feel really threatened. If we go back, to our ancestors, in prehistoric times, if we were faced with something as lethal as a saber-toothed tiger, it would activate the system of fight, flight, or freeze, so we could make sure that we were safe from any threat. And it still is a strong mechanism that works in our thinking. The other thing to really realise about the chimp part of our brain is it really wants to be liked. The reason we have grown and developed is because we've become quite tribal. And that's really important to our chimp thinking, is that we are still liked so we can be part of a tribe. And again, that's really key to our survival. If we're out on our own, we're less likely to survive. So it's important for us to be part of a tribe and to be liked. And the third part really is that the chimp likes to be right in its thinking. So, again, quite strong and powerful, but also it likes the path of least resistance. It doesn't like it when we feel uncomfortable. It doesn't like us feeling under pressure. And quite often, it will do the path of least resistance where we least have to expend some emotional or physical energy, which can often explain where your chimp thinking comes in, where you know you should go to the gym or you know you should do, half an hour of exercise a day, but your chimp thinking might come in and go, oh yeah, you could do that today, but maybe tomorrow. It would want to delay those things, and you'll hear those thoughts come through. And I'll talk to you a little bit about the specific thoughts that the chimp has. And then Professor Steve Peters talks about the human part of the brain, which is our executive thinking. This is our logical part of the brain. This is us. This is you, the human. And it's the one that makes the choices based on your value systems and your belief systems, which you pull from the storage part, which is known as the computer. So whenever you have a stimulus or an input from outside, what happens is it travels into your system, into your brain, and there it goes to your emotional thoughts happen much quicker. Your chimp thoughts happen much quicker, about 80 milliseconds to register an emotional thought, whereas a logical human thought takes 150 milliseconds, or 250 milliseconds actually, so significantly longer. And that's really important to understand in this model, because it really shows you how your thinking can undo some positive things, and you can get into some quite negative thinking because it hits your chimp brain first. And I'm going to give a classic example of this. So let's say you're driving to work and somebody, as you're driving to work, cuts up in front of you. So the car pulls in front of you. Now, knowing how the model works, you understand that it's going to hit the chimp part of your brain first. So you know that if somebody pulls out in front of you, your first response is not going to be, oh, bless them, I can't believe they pulled out in front of me. It's more likely to be quite expletive-filled response, quite angry, quite heightened sense of, speedy heart rate, sort of tension. And that comes from your chimp, which kicks into action really quickly, which is there to protect you. And that was a threat. So it responds so. And the thing is with chimp responses is sometimes they can really take over. And in terms of somebody pulling out in front of you, sometimes you can find yourself driving right up their bumper for maybe 2 or 3 minutes before your human logical brain kicks in, which then thinks, what on earth am I doing? Why am I driving up this person's, bumper? That's absolutely dangerous. And your logic brain starts to pull in bits of information and starts to make the appropriate judgment for the situation. Rather than an emotional response, it makes a logical response. It looks in the back of the car, sees 3 children screaming, and then realizes the person probably didn't see you or they weren't paying attention, and you pull back. But that all happens really, really rapidly. But our chimps can come into play all the time because they are there to look out for threats. In terms of, receiving some criticism, our chimps can come out to play. If we are annoyed about something, our chimps can come out to play. Often you can spot somebody else's chimp much before they spot it themselves, in terms of them being agitated, quite angry, and very irrational, because the chimp is a black and white thinker. Remember, it's the ancient primitive part of your brain in thinking. It hasn't developed the nuances of information and pulling bits together and facts and data. It just, deals with those really primitive emotions and thoughts. And that's really important for us to know. So what I'm going to do with you now is I'm going to share some of those auto chimp thoughts. There are about 12 of them in total, but I'm going to share the 5 that I see most regularly and that I feel you will recognise and that I know I recognise in myself. And I'm going to share them with you just so you can become more aware about them. So the first one is overgeneralizing, or the black and white thinking that the chimp can have. And it uses words such as never and always, the sort of extremes. So it might say something like, oh, they never listen to me, or that's always a disaster, or that never happens to me, or I'm always really unlucky. So those kind of extreme uses of language is definitely chimp thinking. And quite often you can hear that in other people and recognize they're chimps maybe before they do. The other one that comes up very often in schools and is really common, and I recognize it from my own experiences as a teacher and a head teacher, is the mental filter. And remember, that chimp is there to protect you, so it looks out for threats and it pulls on those threats. Let's take parents' evening, for example. When you have a class of 35 and you've seen all the parents, and 34 of the parents gave you really positive responses, loved what you're doing, pleased with their children, that their children are happy and they're making progress, always really good. And then you have one parent that might pull you up on something related to either the child's reading or they're a bit disappointed in something. And what the chimp does is it makes you focus on the threat. So when you go home that evening, instead of seeing the 34 other positive comments, you ruminate on that one very, very small threat. And that can really have an impact on your well-being. But that's chimp thinking, and that's important to know. The next one is the assumption, and the chimp is brilliant at this. It loves to make 2 add 2 make at least 5 or 10 or 15. A nice example of this is either when you send a text or you send a message or an email to your colleague and they don't immediately respond. Now, the logical part of our brain might think, oh, maybe they're busy. Maybe they haven't checked their emails today. Maybe they haven't had time to read through it. Maybe they need to gather some more information first. Or maybe they're waiting to see me in person to respond. But your chimp won't be thinking like that. It will be thinking, why haven't they responded? Is it because they don't like me? Have I done something to upset them? Maybe they don't agree with me. Maybe you've done something wrong you're not aware of. So it has that sort of negative connotation where it's making massive assumptions without dealing with some logic and some facts around the situation. The other thing that you can do, that the chimp brain can do, is this kind of element of emotional reasoning, where it will take something you're feeling or a behavior and sort of enlarge it and make it more than it is. I'm trying to think of a really good example in terms of, say you're in a staff meeting and you don't speak up much in the staff meeting. Your chimp will register that and might feed you information like, oh, you were very quiet in that staff meeting. That must mean you're not really intelligent, or you don't know about the topic that was being discussed. Or the other element that it can sometimes do is associate a feeling and then pull something to it and make an assumption around it. Let's take guilt as a classic example. We've all felt a bit of guilt, but the chimp thinking will take an emotion and it will attach something to it. For example, if I'm feeling guilty, I must be a bad parent. Or if I'm feeling a bit angry, it must be because I'm a nasty person. So again, it makes sweeping generalizations about our emotions and what's happening for us. And last but not least, remember, it's looking for threats and it's trying to protect us. It might take a situation and catastrophize it and make it much worse than it actually first seems. So it can really magnify on something very small. So say, for example, we make a mistake or an error at school, or we forget to do something, our chimp can really kick in with the, well, it's a disaster. You might as well quit teaching altogether because you're obviously no good at it. Because it's trying to protect you, but it doesn't do so in a really helpful way. And the reason I'm highlighting those is just so you can start to recognize when your chimp might come into play, or recognize some of the language that your chimp might be using, because we've all got a chimp. And they don't always behave the way we want them to. And the reason Professor Steve Peters' book's called The Chimp Paradox is because it is a paradox. We need it for our survival, but actually, most of the time, it can be a giant pain for us and not do what we want it to do. Unfortunately, it's a bit like owning a dog. You're not responsible for its nature, it's just the way it is, but you are responsible for managing it. And I'm going to talk through some tools now about how we can manage our chimp and engage with our logical, rational brain a little bit quicker and a little bit better. So we get a much better outcome from it, and it helps with our emotional well-being and it helps us feel happier. with both the way we think and the way we respond to things. So, what can we do about our lovely chimps? Well, let's get used to it. It's there, recognize it, know that it's there, accept it. Everyone's got one, and you will recognize that there are some people that might get your chimp out more often, and there might be some environments which get your chimp out more often. So it's just to be aware that sometimes there are some elements that can rattle your chimp. And just to make sure that you're aware when those times are, that you need to be more aware that they're going to come out. So really, awareness is the first point of call with knowing about your chimp. Secondly, there are some really simple techniques to help manage your chimp. I had a very overactive chimp around having some what I perceived as very difficult, challenging, or combative conversations, So I would shy away from that, and my chimp would say, oh, you don't need to have that conversation. But my logical brain would be, well, if I don't have that conversation, this is going to get worse, it's not going to be addressed, and I'm going to have to do it. So my logical brain would kick in. So I would give my little chimp a reward. So I knew I had to have these difficult conversations. So quite often I'd treat myself either to a donut at the end or some other kind of treat if I had a difficult conversation to pacify. And that's called giving your chimp a reward. So you can reward it, you can distract it. And we know that technique with children. You've heard of the count to 10. Well, that's about distracting the chimp and trying to engage the logical part of our brains. So we are slowing things down. And we can do this as adults. It doesn't have to be counting to 10, but it might be some deep breaths. It might just be slowing down our thought process. It might just be hearing what the chimp's got to say and then helping to dismiss it. Now, I told you our chimp likes to be right, so it can get into a bit of an argument with you over what it wants to do versus what you logically want to choose to do, and you need to be aware of that. So the best way I find of managing my chimp is a deep breath, listening to what it says, recognizing that actually it's trying to protect me and trying to keep safe, and think, yeah, I can see your point of view, but what I want to do on this occasion is this, and connect with that logical part of your brain and make a decision that's right for you. In terms of real life scenarios, if you're ever confronted with somebody else's chimp, use those techniques in terms of give them a bit of time to let their chimp calm down. We call this exercising the chimp. It's kind of a technique for letting the chimp out and expressing itself, and it normally takes about 10 minutes for a chimp to come down and then for your rational brain to engage. Really useful if you're meeting an angry parent with their chimp fell out, that you can just let them express what it is they want, listening, asking questions, but don't respond because you might anger their chimp and it might get yours out of the cage. So exercising your chimp is another technique. You can exercise it by talking about it in a safe space or just ranting and letting it out, but again, in the most appropriate and safe space to do so. So these are really important tools for managing your chimp. And if you manage your chimp really effectively, it improves your well-being and can help you feel more successful. So it's a really good model to be aware of, and I hope you've listened and can recognise some of the chimp thoughts. So the last element I wanted to talk about, and I'll refer back to the beginning, is the storage system, the computer part of our brain. And even though the emotional part of our brain thinks 5 times faster than our human logical part of our brain, both of them refer back to the storage system, the computer, to withdraw information and retrieve information that's really important. Which is great when it's pulling out facts on things that could be of danger, like fire or any kind of tragedy. But in terms of sometimes the computer system has some faulty stuff in the hard drive, things we've maybe been taught or have some beliefs that might be limiting us. Things like, oh, I can't do that, or I'm no good at something, might be stored there and can be referred to by both the human and the chimp part of our brain. So it's just worth questioning sometimes some of the things that our chimp and our logical brains might say. For example, sometimes we can have some things stored in our hard drives that are things such as, I have to be a perfectionist. Our logical brains really know that there's no such thing as perfection, but sometimes our chimps can work hard to make sure that we are doing everything perfect or not bothering at all. So questioning that part of the brain is really important for our own well-being, and I do this a lot through coaching conversations where we can challenge some of the beliefs that we have that might be damaging our well-being. So there we have it. In a nutshell, we have the chimp and human and computer part of our brains and how they work together, and how we can support our well-being by managing some of our chimp thinking. So I just want to leave you today with a quick recap, and that is that everybody has a chimp. And sometimes our chimps are more active, and there are times when our chimps become more active. Sometimes we can see more chimps when we're under pressure, we're under threat, if we're hungry, if we're tired. And it's just worth being aware that our chimps will fully come out during those difficult times, and to recognize the sort of things they might say to us, and then to make the choice over engaging with our human part of the brain and deciding how we want to react and how we want to act and the responses that we want to choose, which we can then negate those really negative patterns of thinking and engage much more positive patterns of thinking. In terms of recognizing after a parents' evening that instead of focusing on that one negative comment, we can look at the 34 brilliant comments we had, and we can balance them better when we engage with our human part of the brain. So there's techniques for managing the chimp. They are expressing it, exercising that chimp, letting it out, sharing it in a safe space. We can distract it, count to 10, take a deep breath to engage with our human brain. We can also reward it, give it a donut or whatever you might need in order to have do some of those things that your chimp doesn't want you to do. And again, the other element is we can really engage with the human logic brain and recognize that the chimp is there to protect us, but really focus on some really logical and fact-driven information which will help us make the right decision. And I really want to leave you today with a quote from the incredible Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And he is was an Auschwitz survivor, and he lived through some real tragedy and unbelievably difficult circumstances. And he managed that through managing the way he perceived and thought about things. And it links really well to how we can manage our own well-being and our chimp thoughts. And it's between stimulus and response, there is a space. And within that space lies our choice and our freedom. So we can choose how we want to respond to some negative thinking and choose a much better path. It would be great to hear from you and for you to connect and tell me if you found this useful. And really great if you could share this with other people. So if you would like to connect and talk about what you felt was useful about this, or if there's anything else I can support you with, the best place to contact me is leonie@thethinkingacademy.co.uk, or alternatively, you can contact me through Twitter, where I'm at Thinking Academy. But do feel free to share this video with your colleagues so you can support people if they have a really active chimp. You will see a lot of active chimps in very small children where they're building up their human part of their brain and learning that. So I hope it's really useful for you, and I look forward to seeing you next week when we talk about emotional agility. Thank you. Goodbye.